Hello, book lovers and English learners. Welcome to our December live read along. I'm Lydie Bureau and I'm an English teacher in France. I'm also the founder of Lydie's Book Club, a book club for learners of English. In this book club, I host live readings and workshops on adaptations of classics of literature and contemporary novels in their original text. I also tend to prioritize books that are written by women. Each month, we read and explore a different book for all levels of English. And 3 times a month, I meet the members of the book club in a live workshop via Zoom to discuss the chapters read over that week. So the members of the book club have the chance to improve their speaking skills and their critical thinking skills and have the chance to interact with other book lovers and practice their English while reading books. Isn't that amazing? Amazing. I'm good, thank you. I hope you're well as well, Etienne. Thank you for joining this live on Instagram as I'm recording it as well to be posted on YouTube afterwards. So this month we are reading the B1 adaptation of Sense and Sensibility, This Beauty, written by Jane Austen, the famous Jane Austen. And this is a 2021 adaptation of the novel. And the original novel is this massive book, as you can see. It's a very reduced adaptation of the book for B1 level of English. So this is a closed bound adaptation, version. Oops. And this is a beautiful object as well. And I love it. All right, so if you want to know more about the novel and Jane Austen's work and legacy, I invite you to listen to the podcast episode 28, an introduction to Jane Austen and Sense and Sensibility. So each month, before we get started with the reading of the book or the adaptation, I introduce you to the author in a podcast, a video podcast, which is also available on Spotify to listen. And this way, it allows you to get to know more about the author, her work, and maybe discover things that you never knew about them, about the authors. And this podcast will be available from tomorrow. It will premiere on YouTube and on Spotify podcasts, Read in English. But so it will be available tomorrow from midnight. So probably by the time you see this video, the podcast will already be out, probably. So I invite you to listen to it, and who knows, maybe you will learn one thing or two about Jane Austen. Also, throughout the year 2025, the town of Winchester in Hampshire, UK, has organized several tours and events in honor of the Jane Austen's 250 years anniversary. So to know more about these events and book your tickets, go to visitwinchester.com. The link is in the description. So today is our first live reading session of Sense and Sensibility, and we're going to read chapter 1 and 2. On Saturday, 21st of December, I will host the first live workshop based on this adaptation. We will cover chapters 1 to 4, so the chapters that we are going to read this week. So we we will be a little bit behind, but don't worry, it will be all right. And it also gives time for readers and learners to reread and perhaps have more time to reflect on the chapters the 4 chapters that we read. So it can be beneficial as well. So if you want to attend this workshop, then and improve your speaking skills too, while chatting about the book, then you just need to subscribe to the book club on lydiasbookclub.com. The link is in the description. And when you are on the subscribing page, you will see all the dates of the live readings and workshops that are planned for this month. And you can make your little agenda and save the dates as well. Right. So now let's get started after this little introduction. So here is this beauty. So we are going straight into the reading, and I might stop to make some comments. And if you're live here on Instagram, if you have any questions, leave a comment and I will take the time to answer your questions whenever possible, when I have a break in the reading. So leave your comment and I'll answer you. Right. So here, if you've never read one of those books, then here you can see a little bit of inside. Here you've got, well, the first page, then the content page. So we will read the 14, well, there are 14 chapters here, and you've got some notes of the story, about the story, and before reading questions. That's very handy for teachers. And then the chapters start here. And at the end, so you can see that there are words in bold. That means that you can find them at the back in the glossary. And all the books have a little code here so that you can go on Penguin Reader's website. And this way you can have access to the audiobook version and also the digital book, and for teachers, any activity sheets that you might need to practice with your students or to practice their comprehension, and maybe think about ways to discuss the novel. You also have during reading questions, which I often use in my workshops. And afterwards, some after reading questions and grammar exercises, grammar and vocabulary, which can be quite fun to do, and also some ideas for project work as well, creative writing work, and so on. Right, so I'm gonna start with the reading of chapter 1. Here. Changes at Norland Park. For a long time, Mr. Henry Dashwood had lived with his second wife and 2 daughters at Norland Park, a large estate in the Sussex countryside. So I have to stop here. Unfortunately, the adaptation here doesn't mention the fact that there are 3 girls, 3 daughters, and not 2. So I don't know why this choice to omit the little sister, actually. So the two main daughters are and main characters in the story are Elinor and Marianne, and they have a little sister called Catherine or Margaret. No, Margaret, I think. And it seems like they've omitted this. It's still a part of the story, and I think it wouldn't have been so much an issue to mention the little sister, although she's not a central focus in the story. So I would say that's not so accurate. That's what's missing in the adaptation. Here is the fact that there are actually three daughters. Henry also had one son, John, from his first marriage. John Dashwood was rich from money he inherited after his mother's death. He lived with his wife, Fanny, who was also from a wealthy family. Wealthy is a synonym of rich. Hello, thank you for joining the live. So we've started reading the first chapter of Jane Austen. So we are here, page 7. And don't worry if you don't have the time to stay the whole session. Hey, low profile. Thank you for joining the live. Yes, so I was saying if you can't stay the whole live reading, then you can find the recording of this session on YouTube from as soon as, if I've got time, I will post it today. So no worries at all if you don't have the time, if you aren't able to stay the whole time. But if you have any questions, please do ask. I'll be happy to answer you. And I would love to know what's your level in English and where you're from. So I'm going to continue the reading, and in the meantime, you can type your answer. So I was saying that wealthy means rich. Okay. Henry had inherited the estate from an old gentleman. This gentleman had wanted John to inherit it when Henry died. So Henry was not allowed to give what he owned to his wife and daughters, except £10,000 for Mrs. Dashwood. This is another element that raised questioning to me because in the original text, nothing is mentioned about £10,000 that would be allowed, that £10,000 money that should go to Mrs. Dashwood. So here, I don't know if this is actually accurate information, but nothing, no specific amount is mentioned in the first part, well, in the first chapters of the novel. So perhaps I'm wrong. I don't know, but for me this is not accurate. But I'll be happy to know what you think. Okay, so low profile, you said, I would say intermediate, okay, and I'm from France. Yeah, bonjour. Nice, great. Whereabout in France, are you from? So I live in Bordeaux, well, in the countryside, near Bordeaux, and I would love to know where you're from. Where do you live? So it's perfect because actually this adaptation of Jane Austen is for your level, intermediate level. So if you love Jane Austen and you would like to start reading in English, then you can purchase this book wherever in any library. That's also an important information. If you want to get these books, they don't sell it on Penguin Readers, but you can get it on Amazon or any bookshops as well. If there is an English bookshop, oh, you live in Paris, nice. If I was in Paris recently with some students, with my students, because I teach also in school, and we came over to Paris a couple of weeks ago when it was snowing. So I know that in Paris there are English bookshops. So maybe if you want to buy the book, then I'm sure they will have this collection. If not this book, then I think you can order it or get it on online, wherever you like to buy your books. Right, nice. And of course, if you want to join the book club, you can go on my website and join us. Right, so let's continue. So I was commenting on the £10,000. So I don't know where that comes from, really. When Henry became very ill, he asked John to visit. So he asked his son to visit. Henry made John promise to take care of his wife and daughters after his death. However, John was a selfish young man, and Fanny was even more selfish. So Fanny is John's wife, and she's terrible. Immediately after Mr. Dashwood's death, John and Fanny arrived at Norland Park, the big house and estate. The estate belonged to them now. Mrs. Dashwood had never liked Fanny, and now she wanted to leave Norland as soon as possible with her daughters. Elinor, the oldest daughter, was tall and pretty. Although she was only 19 years old, she was calm and understood things well. Her sister, Marianne, was 17 and even prettier, with a sweet smile and dark eyes which were full of life. Like her mother, she felt things very deeply and could not keep her feelings a secret. Both Marianne and her mother were unhappy that the estate now belonged to John and Fanny. Elinor was unhappy too, but she controlled her feelings, tried to behave well, and encouraged her mother and sister to do the same. With Fanny at Norland Park, Mrs. Dashwood and her daughters felt more like visitors, although John, remembering his father's words, told them that they must still think of Norland as their home. John planned to give £3,000 to each of the girls and £100 a year to their mother. However, when he spoke to his wife, she did not agree. Hi, Melissa. Thank you. Thank you for your message. So Fanny disagreed with her husband. She doesn't want that her husband give that much amount of money to his sisters, his half sisters or stepsisters. Okay, and his stepmother. So let's see what she says. But oh, that's John talking. But I promised my father that I would help his wife and daughters, he replied. But they will probably marry rich husband, said Fanny. Perhaps £500 will be enough, said John. They will live very well on the £10,000 that they have from your father, and Mrs. Dashwood will not need £100 a year, replied Fanny. You're right, my love. I will sometimes give them a present of £50. That way I will keep my promise, said John. Mrs. Dashwood and her daughters will have enough. They have no horses, very few servants, Fanny continued. Finally, John decided that with a gift of fish or meat, sometimes he could keep his promise to his father. So you see how Fanny managed to manipulate her husband. So from the £10,000 that he was planning on giving them, then he was reduced to barely food, some gifts, maybe at Christmas when he thinks about it. And he believes, his wife, that it will be enough for Mrs. Dashwood and her daughters. And he's fine with it. And to him, that's fine. That means that he fulfilled his promise to his father. I don't know what you think, but that can be debated or argued that's enough. Mrs. Dashwood and her daughters stayed at Norland for several months. Several means a couple months, for a few months, a couple of months, yeah. Mrs. Dashwood wanted to leave, but no home was found. And after listening to Elinor's advice, she said no to several houses that were too large and expensive. Despite Fanny's unpleasant character, unpleasant personality, one thing made Mrs. Dashwood happier to stay longer at Norland. Fanny's brother, Edward Ferrars, was introduced to the Dashwood girls and began to spend a lot of time there, especially with Elinor. So Edward Ferrars is Fanny's brother. So if you understand well, he is the part of the family, in a way, an extension of is part of the extended family, because John is married to Fanny Ferrars. So Fanny Dashwood was Fanny's maiden name is Fanny Ferrars. Sorry. So it seems like the brother is nicer than the sister. And he gets on well with Elinor, with Mrs. Dashwood's daughter. So she's happy about that. Despite Edward was not handsome and he was shy, but he had a good character. His mother and sister both wanted him to be an important person. However, he only wanted a quiet, comfortable, and private home life. His younger brother, Robert, who was their mother's favorite child, had more chance of becoming someone important. I think that you will like Edward when you know him better, Elinor said to Mrs. Dashwood. He is so different from his sister, Fanny, that I love that I love him already. Mrs. Dashwood replied. She soon began to hope for marriage between Edward and her daughter. We will miss Elinor when they are married, she said to Marianne, but we will live close to each other and meet every day. I like him, replied Marianne, but his eyes do not have that fire that shows a really interesting character, and he does not love music. He says that he likes the pictures that Elinor draws, but I do not think that he understands much about art. I could not be happy with a man who did not share my feelings about these things. But Elinor does not care. She does not have my feelings. I'm sure that I will never meet a man who I can really love. Later, Elinor and Marianne also talked together about Edward. It is sad that Edward does not like drawing very much, said Marianne. So here again, it seems like for Marianne, drawing and art, music are very important in a man for her. Hi, Lina. Thank you for joining the live. So we are reading the first chapter of Jane Austen, of Sense and Sensibility from Jane Austen. So I'll be happy to know where you're from and what's your level in English, if you are happy to share it in the comment. So she doesn't seem to she finds him nice. She finds Edward nice, but she uh, thinks that he's not very interesting. Later, Elinor, Marianne, Elinor and Marianne also talk together about Edward. It is sad that Edward does not like drawing very much, said Marianne. But he enjoys seeing my paintings, Elinor replied. I hope that you like him. I know that you did not. You are so honest you are so honest that you would not be able to behave nicely with him. Marianne did not know what to say. She could only speak the truth. After a while, she replied, I do not know him well, Elinor, but I think that he's a good man. Okay, so she likes him still. He has a good character, but he is shy. He enjoys books and has opinions on many things. And although he is not handsome, handsome means beautiful when we talk about a person, his eyes are kind. In fact, I think of him as handsome, said Elinor. So although Marianne doesn't find him handsome, so they probably have different criteria of beauty, well, to Elinor, he is handsome. I will think that he's handsome, Elinor, when you tell me to love him as your husband, replied Marianne. Elinor suddenly felt worried that she had said too much. She could not be sure what might happen with Edward. I like him, and I think well of him, Elinor said. You like him? You think well of him? Your words show a cold heart, Elinor, replied Marianne. Elinor laughed. I'm sorry. I do not know how Edward feels. I feel that he likes me, but he cannot do exactly what he wants. We do not know his mother. But from what Fanny says about her, she does not sound kind. Edward, Edward may now, Edward may know that he could not easily marry a woman who was not from a wealthy family. So here is question of money here again. So you can see that Elinor is very much aware about the importance of wealth and the fact that it might be an issue for him for them to be engaged because we know that she doesn't have any money and Edward needs money. He needs to marry someone with money. So that's going to be a problem. And Elinor seems to be very conscious conscious of that. When Fanny saw Edward and Elinor together, she was not polite. She told Elinor's mother, "Our mother hopes that her sons will marry women from important families with property. Any young woman who is not from a family like that should not try to get close to Edward." So she is very clear with Mrs. Dashwood's hope and desires for her daughters that this won't happen uh, because her mother said that. Yeah. Mrs. Dashwood could not stay calm and immediately left the room. She hated to think that her daughter might be hurt by Fanny's words and did not want to stay at Norland any longer. So this is here. You have a little illustration of the scene with Edward Ferrars there. And that's probably here Elinor, Marianne, and Mrs. Dashwood, perhaps, and here Fanny. Or maybe this is Mrs. Yeah, it's probably Mrs. Dashwood leaving the room, perhaps here. You can see her leaving the room. Just at this time, a letter from Mrs. Dashwood arrived from a relative, Sir John Middleton, who lived in Devon. He was a wealthy man with property and had heard that she was looking for a home. The savior, maybe. He had a house on his estate that she and her daughters could live in. It was only a cottage, but he promised to make it comfortable. In the letter, he encouraged her to come with her daughters to Barton Park, where he lived, to see Barton Cottage. His letter was so friendly that she decided that there was no need to think any more about it. Devon was a long way from Sussex, which now seemed a very good thing. She wrote a letter to Sir John immediately, saying that she was happy to accept his invitation. Right. And just like that, they are off to Devon and the cottage. So now chapter 2, it's called Meeting in the Rain. Mrs. Dashwood was happy to tell John and Fanny that she and her daughters would soon leave Norland and go to live in Devon. Edward looked surprised, and Mrs. Dashwood explained that they only had a cottage. But there was room for visitors. She invited everyone to visit, but spoke in an especially warm way to Edward. Mrs. Dashwood took Elinor's advice to save money by keeping only 3 servants, went ahead to Devon to prepare the cottage. When Mrs. Dashwood and the girls were ready to leave, they all felt sad. "Dear, dear Norland, I will miss you so much," cried Marianne. The journey was long, but finally the carriage reached the green hills of Barton, and they began to feel better. It was September, the weather was good, and everyone tried to look happy. The next morning, Sir John Middleton visited. He was a friendly man who seemed extremely pleased to meet them and said that they must come to dinner as often as possible. Sir John's large home, Barton Park, was very near. Sir John loved to have visitors, and Lady Middleton, his wife, liked to show her home to others. When Mrs. Dashwood and her daughters went there for dinner, Sir John welcomed them warmly. Although also there were Lady Middleton's mother, Mrs. Jennings, a fat and friendly woman who loved to joke, and Colonel Brandon, a friend of Sir St. John's. So here is a beautiful illustration of the dinner party. So here you see Marianne playing the piano. We will read about it afterwards. Then you've got here Colonel Brandon. Here we've got Mrs. Dashwood, Mrs. Jennings, the old lady, funny lady. They're always, I remember reading last month, we read The Age of Innocence, and if you followed the reading and remember the story, there is Mrs. Mingott, the old fat lady who is very funny and always trying to play the matchmaker. And here we can see again the image of the old lady, funny, witty, and matchmaker. We will learn afterwards. She likes to gossip as well. And we've got probably Mrs. Elinor here, and here Sir John, Sir John, and his wife here. So, Colonel Brandon, a friend of Sir John's. He was a single gentleman and around 35 years old, quiet but nice looking. Sir John and Mrs. Jennings talked and laughed a lot during dinner, especially about the future of the two single young ladies, Elinor and Marianne, in Devon. After dinner, Marianne, who was good at music, was asked to play the piano. Sir John said that she played well, but then continued talking loudly. Lady Middleton kept telling him to be quiet, while only Colonel Brandon seemed to really listen and enjoy it. So everyone is chatting about and doing their own business, and no one is really listening to Marianne playing the piano. Only Colonel Brandon. Mrs. Jennings' husband had died, and she was a wealthy woman with two married daughters. Her biggest interest now was to make sure that other women got married. She had noticed Colonel Brandon's admiration when Marianne played the piano. She and the Middletons went for dinner at Barton Cottage when he watched Marianne again with admiration. Mrs. Jennings became sure that he and Marianne should be married. Here is trouble, the matchmaker. Trouble. Mrs. Jennings became sure that he and Marianne should be married. She enjoyed joking about this, but Marianne was surprised. She could not imagine marrying a man of his age, while Colonel Brandon did not listen to Mrs. Jennings' words. After the visitors left, Mrs. Dashwood, Elinor, and Marianne talked about Colonel Brandon. He said that he had a shoulder ache, which shows he is old, said Marianne. Elinor laughed at this. as Colonel Brandon was only 35, although he's double her age, so we can understand Marianne's reaction. After Elinor left the room, Marianne said to her mother, I'm worried that Edward Ferrars is ill. We have been here for 2 weeks and he has not come to visit yet. How can Elinor be so calm? When we left Norland, she did not cry. Even now, she does not seem unhappy. How does she control herself? Because for Marianne, everything is about expressing your feelings, and that doesn't make sense to her that that Elinor doesn't show any feelings, any emotion towards the fact that she's separated from Edward. During the next 2 weeks, the Dashwoods enjoyed doing things in their house and garden. They felt freer than they had felt at Norland after John and Fanny Dashwood arrived there. There were many lonely places to walk, and on one of their walks in the beautiful countryside, the girls arrived in the valley of Allenham, where there was a very large house. They heard that it belonged to a wealthy old lady, Mrs. Smith, who never went out because she was too ill. One morning, after 2 days of heavy rain, Marianne decided to go out. There was light rain, but some sunshine, and she walked up a hill to see the countryside from the top. But the wind suddenly got stronger. Marianne ran into the wind, laughing. Soon, heavy rain began to fall again, and the clouds above were dark. She decided to return home, thinking that she would enjoy running back down the hill. As she ran, Marianne suddenly fell to the ground and hurt her foot. A gentleman, with 2 dogs running beside him, was going up the hill when the accident happened. He ran to help Marianne, but she could not stand. He picked her up in his arms and carried her down the hill. When they reached the cottage, he took her inside. Ah, she found her beautiful Prince Charming here. Arrived the 2 dogs and carrying her in his arms. Elinor and her mother looked shocked. The man spoke with a kind voice and was extremely handsome. Mrs. Dashwood said thank you again and again and asked him to sit down, but he said that he was too wet. He told them that his name was John Willoughby and that he was staying at Allenham. He said that he would visit tomorrow to see how Miss Dashwood was, and then he went out into the rain. So we now have a name for this young gentleman. Mrs. Dashwood and her daughters were full of admiration for how this gentleman behaved and looked. Marianne thought that everything about Willoughby was interesting. He was like someone from one of her favorite stories. As she thought about him, the pain in her foot seemed to disappear. Later, the weather got better and Sir John visited. When he heard about Marianne's accident, he said, "Is Willoughby in the area? I will invite him to dinner." "What kind of person he is he?" Asked Mrs. Dashwood. "He rides a horse, well, and he has dogs." replied Sir John. Hmm. Tell me what you think about this description of Willoughby. Um, it doesn't show any, does it show any um, form of um, um, kindness of heart or strength of character or just it doesn't really show um, any positive traits of character here. Well, he rides well and he owns dogs. And why is he at Allenham? Asked Elinor. Sir John told them that Willoughby came to visit the old lady Mrs. Smith, his cousin, and he would inherit her property when she died. He is a good man to marry, said Sir John. Ah, something quite positive about him. Um, the next morning, Willoughby visited the cottage and was warmly welcomed. At first, Marianne and Willoughby felt shy, but they soon relaxed when he said that he loved music and dancing. She told him that she did too. They quickly discovered that they enjoyed the same writers, how convenient, and the same good books, and the conversation continued like this for some time. They talked, they read, they sang together. Marianne could not go out because of her foot, but this did not seem a problem to her now. Elinor knew that Marianne's heart was with Willoughby. Hmm. So here it is, the end of chapter 2. So that means that chapter 3 and 4 will be for this Saturday. So on Saturday, the 14th of December at 9 a.m., it's different timing than usual, we will read chapter 3 and 4. So I leave you for now with these two chapters and the unfolding of the story, the beginning of the story, and um, the main characters here meeting young men, and we'll see how things evolve. If Elinor is going to meet if she's going to see Edward again, what's going to happen with Marianne and Willoughby. Let me know what you think about the beginning of the story. Tell me what you think about Sense and Sensibility, if you already know about the story, if you've read the novel before. I would love to know your opinion on the novel and the characters as well. I hope that you enjoyed this live reading. Make sure you subscribe to the book club membership to attend our first live workshop session on Saturday, the 21st of December. Have a beautiful rest of the day, and I will see you this Saturday at 9 a.m. for a second live reading of Sense and Sensibility. Bye.